I'm Carmen Twillie-Ambar, president of Oberlin College and Conservatory. Welcome to Running to the Noise, where I speak with all sorts of folks who are tackling our toughest problems and working to spark positive change around the world. Because here at Oberlin, we don't shy away from the challenging situations that threaten to divide us. We run towards them. Welcome to a special holiday edition of Running to the Noise. I'm your host, Carmen Twillie-Ambar. This month, we're unwrapping something a little bit different, a best-of episode featuring some of our most memorable conversations with guests from our first season. You'll hear New York Times Chief White House correspondent Peter Baker talk about what to expect from a second Trump presidency, and former Mayor of Baltimore Stephanie Rawlings-Blake share the challenges faced by women in politics. You'll gain insight into the creative process of groundbreaking artist Rhiannon Giddens, who just nabbed her 11th Grammy nomination, and listen in on a mini masterclass with best-selling novelist James McBride. His new page-turner, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, is slated to become a Steven Spielberg production. We'll revisit our first episode with actor and comedian Ed Helms, who launched the second season of his own podcast, Snafu, this summer. And finally, I couldn't do a best-of episode without returning to my favorite story, how one act of kindness led to an Oscar win for documentary filmmaker Shane Boris. I hope these highlights bring a little extra light and warmth to your celebrations, and thank you for being a part of our community this year. Whether you're tuning in while taking some time off, traveling to see family, or simply taking a moment to reflect, I wish you and your loved ones health, happiness, and plenty of joy. Now let's dive in. You mentioned that you've covered 5 presidents. Anything you want to say about the most challenging president to cover? Do you have a different approach? Is it about how the administration treats you or your engagement with them? What can we know about the difference between covering different presidents?
Well, what's interesting is after Obama, I had become convinced that presidents were more alike than we thought, right? Democrat, Republican, obviously the different policies and their different personalities, but that the dynamics of being president were pretty similar regardless of who the president was, because the issues were often the same and the choices available to them were in this relatively narrow band. And what I learned with Trump is, no, it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
That you can, in fact, blast every norm out of the sky. And that, in fact, all the rules that I thought applied to the presidency turned out to be advisory, not, requirements, right? And he challenged everything I thought we understood about the presidency and about politics. And that made it as a challenge for a journalist, because it's not our job to take sides. It's not, and I think a lot of people want us to. It's not our job to be the opposition, and he wants us to.
Yes.
And we have to be careful not to fall into that trap. He wanted to make us the opposition because it's convenient for him politically. And so it was our job to avoid that. Marty Baron, who is the executive editor of the Washington Post at the time, came up with a great line. He said, "We're not at war, we're at work." Right? He wanted to be at war with the press. That's not our job. Our job is to tell the truth, to investigate, to be blunt at times about the challenges and the facts. And if he's going to tell things that are untrue, it's our job to say he's not telling the truth. But it's not our job to be the opposition. And that's a careful balance, and it's a hard one to find.
So let's talk a little bit about Trump. So for the audience, if you haven't got a chance to read The Divider, it's 652 pages, so you're going to have to set yourself down and get ready for it. It's a deep dive into Donald Trump's time in the White House, and it's a great book. One of the sobering points that I think you make is that you talk about Trump as being more ignorant about the White House and the federal government, perhaps, than any other president in history, but that he began to figure out what power he had along the way, testing his limits and pushing the boundaries. And I think what is so concerning to people about that, who have concerns about Trump, is what would a second Trump presidency look like when he won't have to learn as much, will know what levers to pull, and seems to be prepared to put people around him who are willing to go about his desires in ways that maybe the first group that was in wasn't willing to do. So a big question, I don't know if you can answer it in the time we have, but what do you think the consequences are of a second Trump presidency?
Well, I think that one thing we tried to do with this book is to examine the 4 years he was in office. And if you want to know what a second term is going to be like, look at what's in our book that he tried to do and didn't get to do, right? For all the reasons you said, because he didn't understand how government worked, because he had people around him who he didn't really know, who were more conventional Republicans or military officers or government veterans who basically stopped him from doing some of the more outlandish and more, in some cases, maybe illegal or even unconstitutional things, right? Right. They're not going to be there in a second term. They're absolutely not going to be there. One thing he's learned is not to bring in John Kelly and H.R. McMaster and Jim Mattis and all these figures who spent their lives in the military or the government and who believe in the system, whether you agree with their opinions or not. They're not going to be there. They're going to be pure Trumpers. And they have made clear that their number one priority for putting together a new government is loyalty to Trump and nothing else, more than anything else anyway. So all the things he tried to do in the first term he couldn't do, that's what you should expect in the second term. We had a senior national security official who spent a lot of time in the Oval Office tell us this rather remarkable metaphor. The person said that Trump is like the velociraptor in Jurassic Park. And remember the scene, velociraptor is chasing the children into the kitchen.
Yes.
And the kids shut that door. They think, okay, thank goodness. And then the velociraptor has learned.
How to open the door.
Exactly.
Oh my God. And it's so frightening.
Exactly, right? So this national security official is saying that he has learned how to open the door. And in a second term, he won't be thwarted or stymied in the way he was in the first term on a lot of things he wanted to do, like, getting rid of birthright citizenship, which he doesn't have the constitutional power to do, but he might try to do again, to like getting out of NATO right now in the middle of a war of Ukraine, like all kinds of things that he wanted to do, like use the military in the streets.
Yes. I mean, the recent reporting around what they're putting together around the use of the military with civilians, with the domestic population is nerve-wracking.
And you know why he's going to do it? Because he tried to do it in the first term. And he had a general there in Mark Milley who said, no, that's not what the military is for. Who's going to be general there next time? It won't be Mark Milley. And we don't know what's going to happen. But I think you can assume that whatever happened in the first, we would try to do in the first term but didn't get done, he'll try in the second term without the same inhibitions.
I guess the other thing I wanted to talk to you about women in politics is just a little bit about how women are treated in the political sphere. And I don't know how much you face this. I'd be interested to hear, but just these gendered critiques. I think Kamala Harris has certainly faced that. Hillary faced that as well. Do you smile enough? Did you, wear the right clothes?
Yeah, and it gets exhausting because it's hard. And it's one of those things, it's like racism. It's frustrating to be the impacted person and yelling about it, right? It's much more, I think, effective for someone who is not impacted by it to notice it and say something about it, right? As opposed to, when you're doing it, especially as a woman, now you're whining, now you're complaining, now you're this. But it was incessant. I mean, what shoes I had on, what makeup, incessant. But it was one of those things like, if I'm not going to change it, right? I'm not going, there's people aren't going to wake up to the sexism, to the gender stereotypes, to the way in which they're critiquing leadership decisions and even results.
Yes.
With a gender bias, right? So I can beat myself up and be mad about it, or I can, get up, be the person I want to be every day and get things done.
Right. Did you just decide, Stephanie, because I know that, women face this in all sorts of areas, but particularly in the political sphere because of just the scrutiny. Did you just decide, hey, I'm not going to worry about that anymore. I'm going to put it in this box. When you say it was incessant, did it bother you, or did you just figure out some way to put it to the side?
Both, right? It bothered me because it was annoying. It was annoying. It was annoying because you see people and there are characteristics that if you're a tall man, you're assumed to be smart, It's just frustrating.
Yeah. It's kind of like I've heard people say, if it's a man that makes a decision, if it's strategic. If it's a woman, it's calculating. Because one thing to kind of critique your makeup and your hair and your shoes, okay, that's a certain kind of framework. But the results are this kind of gendered language, if you want to call it that, strategic, thoughtful, careful, calculating, aloof, whatever the phrase is.
Listen, when I got the crime rate, the homicide rate down to the lowest it's been, I swear to you, people said, oh, it was because of the way the moons were aligned. Like, not like, I was making decisions that were impacting and saving lives, but, like astrology or something. It was like crazy. Like they could attribute the success to anything but
your leadership.
Hard work and anything but. And, it's crazy. You mentioned the death of Freddie Gray and the challenges we had after that. I look at the way other mayors, the lens through which they are perceived, their judgments. And I know if I were a different gender, the things that I did would be interpreted differently. I know that if I were a different race, they would be interpreted differently, because I see in other cities where mayors of other genders and other races make decisions that are harmful to the communities that they're trying to serve. They're not called on it.
Yeah.
Right. So when I make a decision to save lives, to make sure that we don't escalate, like I was berated on national television for waiting too long to call in the National Guard.
Yeah.
At a time when I had already seen what happens when there was a rush to militarize a response to a protest.
Yeah.
Right. And, the former governor to this day thinks that he ran in and saved our city. He doesn't have any concept of the fact historically that was a bad decision.
Right.
When we had riots in 1968, I think the National Guard killed like 7 people. Remember something? And imagine what my city would have been if the first call I made was to the governor to bring in the National Guard and 7 people were killed.
Yeah.
Baltimore would not be left, right?
Yeah.
The entire city would have burned down.
You are so diverse in all the things that you can do. And I guess I'm wondering how you became this, I think you've described it, evangelist for the banjo. Maybe you can just help our audience understand a little bit about how you came to this instrument and its importance to you.
Well, it actually does start at Oberlin, because I was here and I was, doing the classical music thing and really loving it. Like, I do want to stress how much I love opera and I love Western classical art music, and I was 100%. And people have made up memories about me playing banjo here. I never played banjo here. I didn't listen to folk music. I wasn't involved in the folk community, nothing. I was like all classical all the time.
Okay.
And then I saw a flyer for what I thought was English country dance. Okay, so follow me. We'll get there eventually.
We'll get there, it's fine.
And I'm a Jane Austen nut.
Oh, nice.
And so that's what they do in the Jane Austen time period, English country dance. And I went, and it was for contra dance. Now, contra dance is the American descendant of English country dance, right? And I was like, well, I'll stick around. And I was like, this is really fun. So I started contra dancing at Oberlin. And I freaking loved it. And that's when I first kind of got into the whole idea of folk dance, and it's always done to live music.
Yes.
So then I started getting the leads in operas, and I kind of had to let that go because all my evenings were taken up. And so when I went down in North Carolina, I got my degree, was kind of like, I don't know what I want to do. And I'm not sure it's opera, because the world of opera is kind of, it just didn't fit who I was as a person. Like, I don't like wearing heels. I don't like wearing makeup. I don't like doing any of that stuff. And it felt like to me that there was more of that in my future. But actually the bottom line for me was, what can I do in opera? I'm one of like 20 million sopranos. What can I do that actually is meaningful?
Okay,
so I was
different, distinctive.
Yeah, and I was kind of like having a hard time answering that question. So I came back home to North Carolina and I started contra dancing. I found the community. There was a very rich community of contra dance where I'm from in Piedmont, North Carolina, and that is where I first heard the old time banjo.
Oh wow.
So I tell you, if I hadn't found that here at Oberlin, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I may not have searched it out, because it was one of those things, if you don't know that it's there,
Right.
you have no clue, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of amazing, and I started hearing the old time banjo. I'd heard the bluegrass banjo. So a lot of people, if they know anything about the banjo, they know the bluegrass style,
Right.
which was like the Beverly Hillbillies,
Right.
which is like bluegrass, which is even Bela Fleck, that's his style is based on bluegrass. And that's what I'd heard. My uncle's in a bluegrass band, all that kind of stuff. And when I heard the old time version, which is a funkier, it's a totally different technique, it's more syncopated, it's more dance rhythms, I was like, what is that? And so I started to like just hear it all the time when I went to the dances, and I started wanting to learn how to play it. You know, I was working as a administrative assistant at a corporation at this time. You know, I was working 40 hours a week and saving my money. And so I bought a really cheap banjo, and then I also wanted to learn fiddle, so I bought a really cheap fiddle.
Any hesitation there, just sort of picking up an instrument? Was that part of your natural, I mean, you use your voice as an instrument, but this ability to pick up other instruments and just kind of take them on?
You know, it's kind of interesting. I obviously have this thing of just throwing myself, you know, I like shrieking into the deep end of whatever I do. And
the way that you approach things.
Yeah. So like, I learned I wanted to be a singer. Okay, I don't know anything about opera, but they sing all the time. That sounds great. Let me do that. I don't know what I was doing. I got here and had to really just release any kind of expectation of knowing what I was doing, release the ego, and just like, you know, accept the instruction that I was being given.
Such a lesson. I hope the audience was hearing that. Release the ego and just step into it.
Right. You know, because like I was here to learn. And so I've kind of done that over and over and over again. And it seems to be my superpower. Yeah. Like when I first picked up the banjo, I was just kind of, you know, learning here and there. I would take a workshop. I would, you know, saved up my money, and I would go for a week in the summer, and I would go to these sort of like roots music camps.
Okay.
Where you could like take classes all week, you know.
And
then
you're still working 40 hours a week.
Absolutely. Well, to get my fiddle and banjo, I took on a second job as a singing hostess for the Macaroni Grill in the evenings.
I've seen those hostesses at Macaroni Grill. That was you.
Yeah, and I, you know, somebody would ask for a song, and I'd sing, and they'd give me a tip or whatever.
I love it.
And I worked until I had enough money to buy my instruments, then I quit. You know, because I was still working 40 hours a week at the day job, right? So, I mean, I know how to work. That's for sure. So I was trying to teach myself and find the instruction where I could. And then I learned about the banjo as an African-American instrument. And that's what I didn't know, you know? And
well, let me just stop you right there for a moment, because I do think that your commitment to sort of the history of the instrument and its roots, and kind of being an evangelist, not just in your ability to play, but to talk about its history, that feels Oberlin to me, this kind of mission-driven approach to the sort of history. So you started doing that research, and what did you discover that just captured you?
Well, I mean, even just the fact that, you know, the African diaspora created the banjo in the Caribbean, like that was huge. Like I had no idea Black people played the banjo. I was kind of like walking into the tradition like, hey, can I do this?
We always
you know?
people accept me here. Yes.
You know, kind of like, and not realizing that it was actually a shared tradition that belongs to everybody. And so that really, it activated me in a couple of different ways. I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I didn't know this. And then I was like, and why don't I know this? And then that rapidly led to, in whose best interest is it that I do not know this? And that's pretty much put me on the track.
Right.
So I was obsessed from then on.
James, what is your routine? So when you have an idea, when that spark of creativity hits you, when you're writing a novel, what is your routine? How do you go about the writing process?
Well, I basically spend months and months and sometimes years researching.
Right.
So that means getting out, talking to people, going to places, you know. It doesn't matter whether, you know, if I have to go to a place, then there's a difference between a McDonald's in Easton, Maryland and a McDonald's in Des Moines, Iowa. And you just have to figure out how to make that, you know, put that in your brain. Otherwise, you can't really smell the land, you know. You have to go there. You have to smell the land. You have to eat the food, and you got to walk the earth wherever you're writing about. You have to walk the earth, even if the earth is that you're walking over is 200 years old from the time you started your story. So basically, I just do a tremendous amount of research. I'm always researching. Life is research. And then at some point, you know, I have enough material to sit down and write. But I don't really write until, you know, the muzzle is fully loaded, pardon the awful metaphor. But essentially, I just do a tremendous amount of research. So I'm always researching 2 or 3 things at a time.
2 or 3 ideas at a time?
Yeah.
Interesting. So when you're doing your research, is it about location first? Is it character driven? You're trying to figure out how to think about a particular character, or is it all those things meshed together?
Not really. I mean, if you're talking about fiction, then, you run into an interesting character in your imagination, and then you have to find a place where that character lives. But then you have to ask yourself, why do I like this character and what that character represents? Because the deeper story of a book is what powers it. Once you get past the structural issues that a novel or a screenplay or a creative writing piece represents, you have to get to, why am I sitting down to write this in the first place? And if you haven't figured that out, then there's no real sense in doing the project at all. So you have to look at writing in two ways. For a young writer, writing is a kind of catharsis and a search for identity. Once you figure that out, then the trade craft, which you can learn at a place like Oberlin, comes into play. And that trade craft comes from, the learning, labor, and discipline you develop as an undergraduate student who studies whatever you're interested in.
Right.
The actual exercise of writing a book, I get up at 4:30 in the morning. I write for as long as I can, which is usually, 2 or 3 hours. And then the phone starts ringing and things that, stuff starts clanging and clanging. And then before you know it, it's 7:00,
right.
PM.
Yeah.
But I usually do my writing really early in the morning. And then if I'm working on anything involving music, I go through stages, I'll practice or whatever. Just so the students know that, when I graduated from Oberlin, I went from Oberlin to Columbia and got a master's.
That's right.
And then I worked at several newspapers, and I quit all those jobs. I did that for 9 years. Worked for, People magazine, Boston Globe, the Washington Post. That was the last job. And I quit that, and then I just played music for 9 years.
Was that decision to quit, were you nervous about that? What was your mindset?
Well, I wanted to be happy, and I wasn't happy as a journalist. So I just went where happiness was. I was happy playing music. I was broke, but I was very happy. When I was a sophomore at Oberlin, I went to Europe on a, exchange program. And I encourage students to do it. They don't do it enough, certainly, but they should. And I met an old lady there who was she was a survivor of the First and Second World War.
Okay.
Her name was Madame Rouet. I used to talk to her about my college life and what I was going to do afterwards. And she said, I've always done what I wanted to do, and I've never been sorry. And I had to look no further than my own mother to see someone who'd always done what she wanted to do and wasn't sorry about it. So
that's right.
If you're making decisions based on money, you're not going to be happy. But you have to be willing to struggle. And that struggle will inspire some kind of creative activity. And that creative activity usually brings a great amount of joy. If you want to be you want to have a steady job the rest of your life, well, teaching is very creative and it's wonderful, and you meet people and you engage with young people who change your life. And that's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it is to simply just decide that, you'll do whatever you need to do in order to do your art, because your art makes you happy.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it worked for me. So I didn't really choose to be a novelist. It just rolled out as life kind of shoved me forward.
Wow. You know what I love about that, James? There's so much debate on college campuses now about how to help students think about their life after Oberlin and their careers. And, we try to do all these things to give them a framework for thinking about it. But you probably gave them the best advice, go do something that makes you happy.
Well, look, when I was coming out of school, they used to say there are no jobs. Forget it. You're not going to get a job. I went to see Thad Jones, Mel Lewis playing in New York, and I was talking to one of the saxophone players, and I said, how much you guys making? And he said, we're making I think it was $30 for the night.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, boy. I said, well, and this guy was great. I said, well, I'm
right.
I might as well get my tin cup out and start begging right now.
If he's making 30 and he's fantastic.
Yeah, right. What about me? But what happens is if students can simply discard this whole business of you must leave school and work for Google right away and make $80,000 a year, or go to Harvard or do something stupid and not really enjoy your youth, you're making a tremendous mistake. The world is full of people driving BMWs, living in gated communities, who hate their jobs and are unhappy. So, you have to move to happiness, and it doesn't mean you should be poor.
Yeah.
It does mean you should work hard, but it also means you should do what you like to do creatively, because if you do it well enough, someone at some point, somewhere, will pay you to do it.
Mm. I'm so happy you're on this podcast because you have your own podcast that is super awesome called Snafu. I guess I just wanted to ask you in my last couple of questions, like, why are you obsessed with impending Armageddon?
It's fun. Come on, it's lighthearted. What's not to love?
What's not to love? It's almost over. Let's be happy about it.
So for a little context, Snafu is my podcast, which is a history podcast about, season 1 is all about an event in 1983, true story. A lot of historians believe it's the closest we ever came to nuclear annihilation.
That I think we should all know more about, but I don't think we really knew about it.
Yeah.
We're like listening to this going, oh my God, I didn't know that when I was an 8th grader or whatever it was almost the end for everyone. You know, I wondered a little bit, like, what do you hope we glean from it? I mean, you're a history nerd. You're trying to teach us something. I know. What do you hope that we're gleaning from this particular story? What are we supposed to learn?
Well, no spoilers. I'm going to let you let people listen to the podcast, because we draw some pretty powerful conclusions towards the end of season 1 of Snafu. But I think just from a little bit of a higher altitude point of view, there was something a little bit cynical in this idea of wanting to do a history podcast, but focusing on the massive screw ups. Because, and the only reason that's a little bit cynical is because of course, people are going to be interested in that. It's like a car wreck. You drive by and you look at it, like you want to see and learn the grisly details. And that's what's intrinsically enticing about a snafu on a huge scale, like a giant international mess up of some kind. So that was sort of the fun reason why we wanted to tell these particular kinds of stories. But then also what's made it, and what I think emerged for us in the writing of season 1 in a way that I don't think I entirely expected, was how much, we always like to say we can learn from history, right? There's lessons in history. Probably the best quote is, the only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. But there are, in these individual episodes or individual events, it is really, really powerful to contemplate different outcomes, different processes, or who made the right decisions here, who made the wrong decisions, who saved the day, how did they do it, and who do we want to emulate? And I love that. That is also like such a fun part of Snafu, is just breaking down the lessons and the takeaways. And some of these things have like really powerful social implications,
yes,
cultural implications. They're not just sort of like, hey, don't launch a nuclear missile.
That's right. We probably could have gotten that one without the whole series. And sometimes it's just interesting to look at history so you can go, that feels real familiar. Maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to this, guys.
Absolutely. And also, there's so much history that is powerful and meaningful that has been lost or pushed aside, or just kind of maybe muddied because of whoever was the dominant storyteller at the time. And, they say history is written by the winners. That's reductive, but true. And so it's interesting to look, well, maybe the losers have some really powerful, meaningful stories. Maybe the winners were really bad.
Right.
And they had bad intentions. So I think exploring history that you're not familiar with, that you don't know, episodes that you've never heard about. And it's almost like fractal geometry. Like, it doesn't matter how small of an event it was, like it can still be revelatory for you.
Are you optimistic about humankind? Like, are we going to make it? What you think? We're going to be okay?
Nope, we're not. It's not good.
It's over.
It's not good.
I was going to say, this is going to be a terrible end to this podcast if Ed goes, sorry, Carmen, we're done.
Yeah, me and this laptop are about to jump out this 10-story window. Here's the thing. I would be lying if I said like, yeah, everything's going to be great. Are you kidding me? But I do believe, let me start with something grim, which is, so I'm very sad. at what has become very clear, which is that humans are not capable of comprehending cataclysm at scale. You know, we're basically watching the earth turn into a ball of fire.
Right.
And all we're doing is just kind of writing news stories about it and talking to our friends, being like, oh my gosh, can you believe this is crazy? But this is the earth giving us alarm bells. And we're still just kind of like, yeah, man, I guess that's kind of crazy. So I am very dismayed by this sort of like what seems to be a kind of evolutionary glitch in the human race, which is we just can't understand, comprehend, or sort of take on problems at that scale automatically. But I am also very encouraged that seems to be shifting. And as much frustration and division as there is in America right now, I think what's even more powerful is a desire for it to be better and a desire for it to like heal and get better. There, unfortunately, is a lot of just kind of nihilistic rage that we're dealing with. I mean, that's very real. And honestly, I get it. Like, I get feeling that way.
There's a few things to be mad about, Ed. I'll give you that.
Yeah, but we just have to tap into the best version of ourselves. And, you know, I have kids, so I don't have a choice. I got to just try to make this world as beautiful as I can because my kids are the most amazing creatures the world has ever known, and I want them to thrive and be happy.
Tell us a little bit about your path, kind of how you went from freshly minted OB graduate of Oberlin College, I have my politics degree, to producing these incredible films.
Sure. Yeah. I think I took a very circuitous path that followed the flow of what was happening with and to me. Right after Oberlin, I took a year off. I spent some time, I worked in Alaska for an indigenous like cultural and language preservation organization. And then I went to London to learn Hindi because I was going to grad school in India. And on my flight to India, the flight got canceled and the ticket agent was looking completely beleaguered and despondent. And I bought him a sandwich just as sort of just like, it's going to be okay. And then when I went to get my ticket, I was 23 at the time. You know, when I went to get my ticket, he gave me a business class seat.
Wow.
And then the person sitting next to me was a producer from Hollywood on his way to India to make a film.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was a really serendipitous encounter. His name is Andy Spalding. And he just showed me the script that he was going to make. We just got to talking and he fell asleep. We woke up in Frankfurt on our layover and I just told him what I thought. And he said just there in the airport that I should come shadow him on set in Tamil Nadu in southern India. So I went to New Delhi where my university was. I registered for classes and then I took another flight down to the south to be with him for a week. And that was my first exposure to film.
Oh my God. That is one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard, because I think one of the things that's so powerful about it is about, you know, life sometimes meets you, but you have to be willing to go and meet it. And in that moment, you were willing to go and meet it. You said you read the script and he woke up and you gave him up your perspective. What did you say to him?
Good question. What did I say? I don't remember, to be totally honest. Let me think.
It changed the trajectory of your life. What were these compelling words that you said to this person?
Wow, nobody's ever asked me that, actually. What I can honestly remember is that I know that for most producers and for most people when they share their work, it's hard to get honest feedback that's not trying to make something into something it's not, too.
Yeah.
I can imagine that what happened was I really tried to read the script, understand what it was and what it was going for, and communicate my appreciation for that and some ideas of how it could be thought of in a different way and portrayed in a new light.
Right. Because you weren't trying to accomplish any career thing when you were having that conversation. You weren't making those comments with an end in mind.
Exactly. I think there's a real power in not wanting things from everybody that you encounter, wanting something that improves your situation, your station in life, and rather the very difficult task of just loving everyone and telling the truth and doing both of those things at all times and trying to make the encounter beautiful and meaningful and true for what it is.
Yeah. And it led to, I mean, it wasn't the only thing on your path, but it certainly is an important part of why you've ended up where you are. That moment, those few moments that were not planned, not structured, not designed, not even hoped for, but just happened. I love it.
That's right.
Thanks for listening to Running to the Noise, a podcast produced by Oberlin College and Conservatory. Our music is composed by Professor of Jazz Guitar Bobby Ferraza and performed by the Oberlin Sonny Rollins Jazz Ensemble, a student group created through the support of the legendary jazz musician. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this episode online so Obies and other folks can find us too. I'm Carmen Twilley Ambar, and I'll be back soon with more great conversations from thought leaders on and off our campus.